Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum, Namaskar, and hello everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Irfan Yar. I'm the founder of Afghanistan Security Institute. It's a small think tank based in Canada. We are focusing on Afghanistan and US relationship. Today, it's an absolute honor to be moderating this session, and I'm sharing this panel with our distinguished panelist, Achim, Troster, German ambassador. We have Mustafa Osman Turan, second to my left. We have Gwyn, UN resident coordinator. We also have Ambassador Waliur Rahman. And last but not least, we have Simon Kofi Tettey from WHO Malaysia. And I welcome you all. Thank you for being here. For this session, we will have just a housekeeping announcement, 15 minutes. And distinguished speaker, I will pose one question to each of you. And if we could keep the limit to 5 minutes maximum, that will be greatly appreciated. And audience, I would really need your help in this by paying attention to our distinguished speaker. And of course, in the end, we will have a question session. So feel free to get your question ready. Ladies and gentlemen, as you all know, we are facing an unprecedented refugee crisis. According to United Nations, there are more than 32 million refugees. And this is not just a number. Every one of these refugees has stories. Before I proceed with the agenda, I would like to know if there's anyone in this audience or panel who has spent a life in a refugee camp. If there is, please raise your hand. Any refugee here? Well, I'm the one, so I could represent refugees. I was born in a refugee camp. I grew up in a refugee camp, and now I have the honor to, speak on behalf of many other refugees. So it's going to be a very interesting panel, and we would love, again, to have your attention. So if you could please reduce the noises, it would be much appreciated. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, tragedies such as the genocide of Rohingya people, the conflict in Afghanistan, the conflict in many other parts such as Syria, other countries in the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America have further exacerbated the refugee crisis. Some countries are willing to accept refugees. Some countries are not willing to accept refugees. So we have a very, we are facing a big dilemma. And to discuss this crisis, we will pose some questions to our distinguished panelists. My first question is to you, Your Excellency Mustafa Osman. According to the 1951 Refugee Convention, I think every state is responsible to share, I would call it, burden of refugees, which is not burden in long term, but anyways, they need to share this burden. In Turkey hosts some of the biggest number of refugees. I think this is the most significant number of refugees that the country is hosting, which is 3.7 million. And after Colombia, Germany is the third largest host of refugees. We also have some other countries, for example, Pakistan and now Bangladesh, who are hosting refugees. Their acceptance of refugees is really commendable. However, this comes with a price that these countries are paying. So my question, sir, to you is, how would you assess the current refugee sharing burden? And what are the challenges that the host countries are facing? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question and the introduction. I agree with you when you said, the refugees, when we talk about refugees, we talk about numbers, but those numbers represent human beings. And each one of them has a story. And each one of them, go through very difficult experiences as a refugee across the borders, fleeing conflict or persecution or whatnot. So And we should also not forget that each one of us in this room can turn into a refugee, maybe in a very short period of time, just because our country can go into war or get affected by natural disasters. So being a refugee is not something that we should think is a distant possibility for any of us. I'm saying this because we need to develop some level of empathy, and that's exactly countries like my country, as well as Bangladesh, and all those who are hosting significant numbers of refugees have somehow developed that empathy towards refugees. They pursued a certain amount of open door policy when even when the influx of refugees were in high numbers, such as the one in Syria, which started 11 years ago. And currently we are hosting, as you said, 3.7 million Syrians. We have more refugees. It goes up to 4 million, and there are some other nationalities in that figure. And when you look at how long refugees stay in a country, unfortunately, that number is very bleak. I think the UNHCR has made some calculation, and refugees typically stay for long periods of time in countries where they receive protection. And that's what happened in my country. It's been 11 years. We've been trying to address the political process that would bring peace and stability to Syria through various diplomatic means. But unfortunately, so far we were not successful. And in the meantime, obviously, the refugees need shelter, need food, need education, need health services. And all of this cost a lot of resources to be shared with the refugees. My country alone spent, without the foreign assistance I'm talking about, spent 40 billion US dollars to take care of 3.7 million Syrians in the last 11 years. So that's a lot of resources. And obviously you talked about and asked about burden sharing. We have had a deal with the European Union in 2016. According to that deal, there would be a certain level of burden sharing. Some resources were committed, but there is always a problem in the delivery of those resources when it comes to burden sharing. For example, most of those resources are spent by financing the activities of aid organizations. Like the percentage that goes directly to the refugees is rather less, much less than what is promised. And also the pace of the delivery of burden sharing is always much slower than what is needed. So there are all kinds of complications, and the deal that was struck with the European Union at the time also included a lot of other elements which were also remaining unfulfilled until today. So there are always political considerations, and what I was really sorry to see was, there is also some level of discrimination when it comes to refugees coming from this country or that country, depending on their background, whether they are Muslim or Christian, whether they come from this ethnic background or that ethnic background. Countries sometimes apply discriminatory practices, even if this is not allowed by the international human rights standards. Each refugee is a human being, as I said in the beginning, and if we talk about human rights, we have to treat them equally and fairly. We have seen a lot of tragic images on the shores of Aegean coast of my country, when refugees were pushed back, and treated very inhumanely sometimes. So I think being a refugee is not an easy thing, and burden sharing is very complicated. Bangladesh is asking for burden sharing and receiving only partially what they need, both in political terms as well as financial terms. There is a plan every year that is prepared. Only 50 or 60% of it are financed through the donor resources. Obviously, every day there are new priorities on the international scene, which reduces the amount of resources that are allocated to the Rohingya people. So it's a very complicated story, and my country is doing its best to alleviate the burden that is put on many different countries. We are named as the most generous humanitarian donor in the world, spending 0.8% of our GDP for humanitarian assistance since the Syrian conflict started.
Thank you, Ambassador, for your insightful remarks. And as I mentioned, please, a big round of applause. Ambassador Troster, your country, Germany, is also the largest recipient of refugees. In Islamic world, we say Muslims are brother among themselves. And if you look at some of the richest countries in the Gulf, they are not accepting any refugees. It's in fact our Christian brother, I would say, in some other nation like America, Europe, specifically Germany, they are accepting and welcoming refugees. So how would you analyze this kind of dilemma? I understand they do contribute to, let's say, UNHCR, but accepting refugees would be also, something that they could show sympathy toward their brothers who are suffering. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, let me point out that the Federal Republic of Germany stands wholeheartedly by its humanitarian commitments. We do this out of a very deep and sincere conviction because of humanitarian considerations. We really stand by the humanitarian principles. And I think this is also a lesson that we have drawn from the past. We, in the 30s and 40s, had a dictatorship in my country, the Nazi state dictatorship, and the most brilliant heads were very happy to be accepted in the US or in neighboring countries. So we feel a great gratefulness and also an obligation out of that. And we, as well as my dear colleague Mustafa has pointed out, we see in every individual, we see a human being that has its natural human rights, and of course its needs, and that have to be provided for. So for us, I'm repeating it, the humanitarian principles apply without any limits, and we don't distinguish between where you come from, which beliefs you adhere to. For us, everybody is a human being with all its human values. Since, even though we are under heavy economic strains after the Russian attack on the Ukraine, we are still at least considered a rich country. I think we have a special obligation to do more than others. And so I would not point out at others who could perhaps do a bit more than they actually do. Well, of course, in the international realm and frameworks, we try to plead for a more equitable burden sharing. That, of course, but we do not have an approach that is mainly guided by this. But on the other hand, at the end of last year, Germany gave shelter and home to approximately 2 million refugees and asylum seekers, and after the Russian attack on Ukraine, 1 million people from the Ukraine have been added to that. So we have 3 million refugees in Germany, and of course, only a look at the newspapers, mainly also at the region newspapers, is sufficient to see that also a rich country like Germany is coming somehow to its limits. We don't have refugee camps. We try to give everybody a shelter in apartments and houses. But of course, also Germany may reach somewhere, I cannot define when there's the point, but reach the limit of its capacities. And that's why we also have been pleading within our own realm, which is the European Union. We have been trying to reach for a, in our point of view, more equitable distribution of refugees. But you know this, if you are here in Bangladesh, it's an extremely sensible point, perhaps one of the most sensible points in foreign policy. And this is really a long haul, and it needs time and patience, and we are not yet very far.
Gwyn, one of your key roles here as UN resident coordinator is to coordinate all the UN efforts to cooperate with the Bangladesh government in the context of 2030 Sustainable Agenda or Sustainable Developmental Goals. And as you know, we have a massive number of refugees from Rohingya people here. So when you coordinate the UN efforts, are those efforts sufficient? What are the challenges that refugees on the ground are facing here? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the question. I just wanted to also come back to the point that you made at the beginning, that there are 32 million refugees in the world, but they're out of 100 million people who are displaced globally. So in addition to refugees or displaced people who are facing conflict situation, we're seeing increasing numbers of people displaced by climate change, and it's really unprecedented, very, very dramatic. And as a result, it's also becoming more and more difficult to find durable solutions for people, for refugees, for displaced people. So I suppose just to answer your questions, there's really three broad areas of agreement and work that we're doing with the government of Bangladesh. Maybe to start by saying that the first point or the first principle is that the solution to this crisis is not with Bangladesh, it's obviously with Myanmar. So we are continuing to work in Myanmar in terms of the UN work on the ground in order to find ways to create a viable and conducive environment for return of refugees. So the work that's been done on the ground is to establish programs and projects in order to support the conducive return. And we also have a special envoy on Myanmar, Nolene Hauser, who has had a recent visit and who is lobbying with the Myanmar authorities. And we also have to obviously rely on ASEAN, to rely on China and India and regional partners in order to exert pressure and to lobby with the Myanmar authorities. And we hope that over the course of the next year, with Cambodia's leadership of ASEAN, we'll be able to see some more efforts in that regard. The General Assembly, the Security Council have also increased their efforts. But all of these political efforts really need to continue and to be reinforced because we're not seeing the changes that we need on the ground. The second area of work is really looking at how we ensure the safe return of the Rohingya to Myanmar. It doesn't only need to be safe, but it also needs to be voluntary, and the return ideally needs to be sustainable. So we're doing a lot of work with the refugee community and the government looking at teaching children the Myanmar curricula. We have already 250,000 children enrolled in the Myanmar curricula, for example. We're doing a lot of skills development, so when people go back, they have jobs and they know how to work and support their communities. And so there's a lot of efforts being done in that regard in order to really help the refugees when they go back to have skills. There's 20,000 volunteers in the camps at the moment who are working on various support measures for their community, and these are also skills that they're requiring to go back home. The third point, and Mustafa and Achim have already pointed to it, which is really Bangladesh is not alone in having to deal with this crisis. Bangladesh has obviously taken the burden of the response and the responsibility, but the international community and the UN were here to support. And that support is obviously for the refugees living in the camps in Cox's Bazar and Basan Char, and that funding is very important. But there's a huge amount of effort and work that's also being done with the host communities and to support the communities in Cox's Bazar in order to make sure that the burden isn't really as heavy on them. Things like replanting, reforesting, 3,000 hectares of land. There's been work to build a hospital. There's been a lot of infrastructure investment from the World Bank and ADB. So a lot of those efforts will continue to try and support Bangladesh as well as the host the local host communities and the refugees. Finally, maybe just to finish by saying, not very hopeful note, but the context is very difficult at the moment globally. Increase in food prices, competing crises like the Ukraine or Afghanistan really make it very challenging to fundraise. But we are really, really committed to make sure that the support continues and to continue to advocate politically for the refugees.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Waliur Rahman, to you. So before I come to Dhaka, I was very much involved with refugees communities, and some of them were mentioning that there is a sense of double approach toward different refugees. I mean, refugee is a refugee, be it from Africa, be it from the Middle East, or be they from Ukraine. They should always be treated equally. In some countries are, for example, welcoming generously Ukrainian refugees. It's great, they should. But this generosity is not offered to, let's say, refugees from Africa, from Afghanistan, or from Syria. And I feel this should trouble every right-thinking person here. What are your thoughts on this discrimination to treat different refugees differently? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, co-panelists, friends. In 1971, during our War of Liberation, I resigned from the Pakistan government in Geneva, and I became a refugee. And I spent 9 months as a refugee till the time of our independence. Then from 73 to 75, I organized the transfer of not refugees, but people, Bengalis in Pakistan and Pakistanis in Bangladesh. Their transfer through the support of the Red Cross, Swiss Red Cross, or ICRC actually. Now, in the case of the Rohingyas in Bangladesh, it's a very peculiar system. We don't call them refugees. There are problems. There are reasons, you understand. It gets us into some additional responsibilities. Now, in 73, if I may go back, we had about 300,000 refugees in Bangladesh. So in 76, 77, some responsibility was given to me, and I succeeded in getting them out of Bangladesh exactly from the same place, same area, with the support of the Organization of Islamic Conference, OIC. Now, how I did it, that's a very different story. But today, it's I call it a double hazard. They have been here. The number is increasing. And we see no hope of their going back. Our meetings with the Myanmar, the Burmese government have been very negative rather. They're not responsive. So this is and on top of that, I think the organizers have mentioned here the Ukraine, the Soviet, beg your pardon, Russian invasion of Ukraine has impacted on the support that we were getting from our very kind, distinguished donor communities, because a lot of support is being transferred there, and quite understandably so. So for us, if I have to speak as a citizen, a conscious citizen of my country, serious efforts have to be made by international community. My friends are here, important people, and how the efforts will be made, that has to be recognized by them, because Myanmar situation is increasingly getting complicated to us as Bangladeshis. Unfortunately, some of the countries which are our friends, including Russia, they are the largest supplier of arms to the Myanmar junta. And there are many other countries. I will not take the names now. I will take your time. But then the point is that if we do not make concerted efforts, how we have to do that, perhaps the donor community will understand that. It's an impossible thing for a country like Bangladesh to take them, to rear them, to feed them. But then on top of that, as the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina, has said very well, and rightly so, this is becoming a security problem for Bangladesh. It's not a humanitarian crisis anymore. It's taking a dimension of its own as a security problem. So that is my problem. That is my concern, that at the moment we are keeping them okay. Some shots have been, some people are being shot dead, some Hezbollah were shot dead, and a few people are running away from here and there. But then to bring this to a conclusion, we need concerted efforts by all those friends who are sitting here and outside to come together and to make sure that to stop supporting, as the Americans have done very well. The ambassador said yesterday, I'm so proud of him, that they have to stop giving any such support to Myanmar regime. So all the countries who are supplying arms to Myanmar junta, they should make a public comment, public statement to the people of the world that we are not supporting the junta so long as they do not take back the refugees, the Myanmar citizens from Bangladesh.
Thank you very much for your insightful remarks, even though we did not get our key point, what we wanted, but thank you again for your answer. Very briefly, Ambassador Troster, statistics shows that 72% of the refugees are coming from countries such as Syria, Afghanistan, Venezuela, and Ukraine, in South Sudan. And what I see common in these countries as the conflict. In some ways, either it is West or East involved, they are the direct part of this conflict that drives the refugee crisis. And at the same time, these countries are supporting refugees. So I believe there seems to be very short-term, strategies curing the symptoms of refugees. So why don't international community at all end the conflict so there will be very, very less refugees? The floor is yours, sir.
Well, I think the underlying assessment of this question is that we do not enough to settle the conflict and to bring them to peace. Well, of course, as a member of the German Foreign Ministry, I'm of course pleading for my home that we do enough. But if you look at the international level and all the institutions that we have that are really set up for conflict settlement and also for prevention, I think we're doing already quite a lot. And I think the gist of the question is perhaps a bit above the political realm, because it points to the very nature of mankind. Let me just remind us that currently 23 UN missions are underway, and they are not in countries where peace and prosperity reign. And if you only look at the sphere of the OSCE, the Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, we still maintain more than 13 missions in different European countries. So I think we are really doing quite a lot. With regard to, and I think the gist of the question is also why are we not as successful as we wish to? But this points a bit, I think, let me become a bit philosophical to the complexity of problems and also to the question of evil. I think in the last in the last wars that have been triggered off, there's also that we have seen a lot of trials to prevent these conflicts. Yesterday, the chief guest said he could not have remarked any single undertaking. I don't know what he has been doing before the 21st of February, but I may only remind that my own foreign minister went 2 weeks, I think, or 10 days before the Russian attack to Russia and was really seriously asking Russia what it was about to prepare, and the answers were not really in concordance with what happened afterwards. You may term that as you may. So I think it is extremely complicated, but at least with regard to the humanitarian system, with the UN and also with the German setup, in the last 10 years, a lot has been done to shift from let me say, just remedying and delivering humanitarian aid to come to the prevention side. In my country, a lot has been done. In my own ministry, a whole department has been set up that is exclusively dealing with very concrete projects that come along with all the UN undertakings. Well, of course, I completely admit the successes are not as we wish them, but I think that has really underlying causes. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. We have our last panelist, and the concluding question that I would put for him is, how would you see the refugee crisis, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years? Will they increase or will they decrease based on your experience that you have with the UN? Thank you. Simon.
Okay, thank you very much. Actually, based on the outlook and the current trends, I see the refugee issues to be decreasing based on 2 things. One, it must be emphasized, or the background for people to become refugees are mainly war, persecution, violence, conflict, and then a natural disaster like flooding and all that. And situations that are happening recently, for instance, the meeting between President Biden and Xi Jinping, which are the top superpowers in the world, shows there's going to be a cordiality. And I see that cordiality to be able to impart even Russia, to be able to talk to Putin in Ukraine. So I see that kind of cordiality between President Biden and Xi Jinping that happened recently in Indonesia to be kind of a positive outlook for refugee situations. And I would not be surprised if President Xi Jinping started talking to Putin. Secondly, climate change, because I think that is the part that many people don't know that can cause refugees as well. Because with drought and flooding and famine happening around the world due to climate change, people will have to move from where their countries to another, because if there is no water, there's flooding, there is no drought in your country, you cannot survive. You have to move to another country in order to survive. So people will flee with this. And with the current climate change conference on COP27, I see a lot of seriousness and commitment among all the countries that were represented there, that we have to be serious with climate change. And climate change can have impact on the life of all of us. Tomorrow we can wake up and there will be flooding here. We will have to be relocated somewhere, and that will cause us to be refugees as well. So with these two issues that happened, these two global recent issues, I see the outlook to be very positive and good. So I would rather see refugee situations to be, in the next 5 to 10 years, to calm down a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. We hope refugee crisis come to an end, but if we have people like Putin, I'm very pessimistic that the refugees crisis will come to an end in the near future or reduce. But anyways, please join in thanking me, our distinguished panelists. But before that, just very quick, 2 questions I would like to take from the audience. The man at the back, please. Okay, after him, you may ask your question. After, sir.
Got a very simple question, sir. Question is, thank you, Irfan, for moderating this session, and thanks for giving me the space. My question is directed to Ms. Lewis and Ambassador Waliur Rahman. Is there any, I'm a layman on this topic of refugee. We are not calling the Rohingyas as refugees. Is there an implication on that, the treatment or handling of this so-called illegal migrants from Rohingya?
Thank you for your question.
I get puzzled with this definition of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can take another question and then come to answer. The gentleman in the back seat.
Okay, thank you. My name is Emmanuel. I'm from Ghana. I have 2 quick questions. The first
It shall be 1, please.
Okay. Then I would ask on the UK sending refugees to Rwanda. I want to know your thoughts on this phenomenon, because I think that if it's allowed, other countries will follow suit, and it may not be the best path for refugees. Thank you.
And that question is addressed to whom?
The panel.
Anyone on the panel who would like? Okay, got it. Can we accommodate just 1 more question, maybe, to the gentleman there?
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Zahid Khan. I just have a quick question, and thank you, Simon, for bringing the climate refugee issue here. Actually, the picture is not that rosy. According to the United Nations study, United Nations University study, by 2050, there will be around 200 million climate refugees. Sadly, we do not have any international instrument which grants this climate refugees a refugee status. So my question to you would be, what you and also the UN resident coordinator have in the plans of action to promote the idea that climate refugees should be included into the international law regulations. And I'm also intrigued to see 2 Excellency Ambassador from European Union, not European Union.
From Turkey.
Yeah, from Turkey and Germany, who have been the champion of hosting refugees. But we also have examples in Europe where ships full of people are denied to enter. So in a collective way, what Europe can do to sort of normatively influence countries like Italy, where things are happening like that.
Thank you for your question. So I thought they got the question, I believe, yeah. Just if you could respond only in 40 seconds, I know that will not justify the answer, but we really have to be strategic given the time limitation.
So Bangladesh has never adopted the 1951 Convention on Refugees, meaning that the status of refugees is not recognized in Bangladesh. So the main significance of that for the Rohingya is that citizenship rights or national identification is more challenging. But Bangladesh has opened their doors, obviously, in terms of humanitarian support. They have followed the principle of non-refoulement, so refugees can come in safely, and have facilitated taking care of 1 million people. So in many respects, a lot of the principles have been respected. And then we have technical issues in terms of which agency is in the leadership of the response, and I won't get into the specifics of that, but that's why the refugee status isn't in place in Bangladesh. Maybe I can reply on behalf of my colleague
sure.
on the. I mean, I completely agree with you. I'm a little bit less optimistic than my colleague. I do see the situations of refugees and displaced people getting worse over time. There's been a huge amount of efforts at global level in order to address and try and put in place better systems and support. There's the Global Compact on Refugees, the Global Compact on Migration, and Bangladesh has taken huge strides in terms of policy frameworks and legislation in order to make sure that people who are migrating from Bangladesh because of climate issues are protected when they're traveling, are assisted, but also that there's support in place in the countries where they go. There's also efforts, because people aren't only crossing borders, there's people who are displaced within countries, and there's huge issues around increased urbanization, people having to live in slum areas. So that whole category, there's a new compact not a compact, there's a special panel on internally displaced people, looking at durable solutions, looking at protections and assistance. But fundamentally, the principle here is prevention, and looking at ways we can do better, whether it's national adaptation plans and financing. I'm also less optimistic than my colleague. I don't think COP was actually what we wanted. It's very positive that we have a loss and damage fund in place, but ultimately the commitments that we need to reduce carbon emissions were not really met. And so we have a lot of work to do and a lot of support that is needed in Bangladesh to meet the mitigation and the adaptation targets.
Thank you. Okay, sounds great. So to conclude, I think the distinguished panelist touched.
The question, as far as I understood, was UK's policy of sending refugees like asylum seekers to Rwanda for out of a deal that they, is that the question? Oh, yes. No, this is I think, I don't know the specifics of this agreement. And there was a talk in the UK that the UK, the former Prime Minister of UK mentioned a similar scheme of sending asylum seekers to my country, similar to Rwanda. And my ministry has made a very, very clear statement that this is against international law. It's the asylum seekers who apply for a refugee status need to be protected until their asylum applications are processed. They should stay in the country where they seek asylum. Obviously, out of political reasons, externalizing the refugee issue by exporting it to other countries is not a solution. And the deal that we struck with the European Union back in 2016 also foresaw a provision that would relocate some of the Syrians who were sent back to Turkey because they went to Europe through Turkey. We agreed to take them back with the condition that there would be a regular channels through which they could be relocated in European countries. This has not been implemented. So let alone receiving refugees in a regular fashion, now some of the European countries are trying to export them to other countries like Rwanda and offering, some financial resources for it. This is not the way to go. I think when it comes to human rights, the standards and the principles related to refugees is an internal part of the human rights framework internationally and applying human rights on a selective basis and ignoring the human rights of the refugees is not the way to go, according to my government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we here have three men. I'm really okay, please, but please be brief.
General Karim, thank you. I have consulted on this very question my two professors, Professor Ian Bromley and Professor O'Connell. And they both agree that under circumstances relative to situation like Bangladesh, a country which has its own problems, we do not necessarily have to give them the status of refugees. But then we have accepted the formula, the law, the legal responsibility of the principle of refoulement or non-refoulement. We have accepted that, the principle of non-refoulement. Therefore, under those circumstances, they are here, and our friends are assisting us to take care of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So here we saw that conflict and the climate change are the key drivers of refugees. And there should be also a more enhanced and a more cooperative international system to handle this refugee crisis. So please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists. A big round of applause. Thank you, Your Excellencies. Thank you.